The air crackles with urgency, a metallic symphony of fear and desperation playing out over the radio. In this crucible of chaos, where every second counts, there are soldiers pinned down, facing at overwhelming odds. But then, there's a different sound, the low, rumbling roar of a beast waking from slumber. This is the sound of hope, of salvation. It's the sound of Captain Riley Hawk Jameson, a pilot whose reputation is as fierce as the A-10 Warthog she commands. She is not a hero of speed or stealth, but of raw, unyielding persistence, a guardian angel forged in metal and fire, ready to descend from the sky and turn the tide with thunder and steel. Colonel Jacobs leaned over the operations table, his shoulders tight, his gaze locked on the glowing digital map in front of him. Red markers pulsed along grid Echo 3, each one a signal of enemy movement, fast, coordinated, and closing in like wolves. A U.S. infantry squad was pinned against a jagged ridge. No tanks, no drones overhead, no air cover. They had minutes, maybe less, before the enemy swallowed them whole. He stabbed a finger at the map. Get me close air support. Now, I don't care what bird it is, any jet will do. The room erupted into motion. Controllers scrambled, flipping through flight rosters and muttering to each other as they scanned availability charts. The Stuff 15s are too iffy, Wanda said. Raptors are grounded. Maintenance issue, another added. Finally, a controller hesitated, a note of uncertainty in his voice. Sir, we've got one bird ready to launch, an A-10C Warthog. Pilot is Captain Riley Jameson. Jacobs didn't even look up. Send it. That was all Riley, call sign Hawk, needed to hear. She was already sprinting toward the hangar, flight helmet tucked under her arm, boots pounding against the concrete. Her squadron called her Hawk not just because she flew, but because she hunted. While others climbed high to evade danger, she dove straight into it. While others hesitated, she fired. In the A-10 community, her reputation was legend. Yet that same community had been pushed aside for years in favor of sleek stealth jets and supersonic speed. She didn't care. Sliding into the cockpit of her Warthog, Riley felt her heartbeat slow, the world narrowing to the familiar hum of switches and the scent of jet fuel. She moved through her checklist by instinct, her hands following muscle memory earned in 1,000 combat hours. Outside, the crew chief gave her a sharp thumbs up. Twin turbofan engines roared awake behind her, low and guttural, the sound of a beast roused from slumber. The aircraft rolled forward, its broad wings slicing through the morning haze. The control tower blinked green. Riley pushed the throttles. Her Warthog thundered down the runway and lifted into the sky, leaving the base in a shuddering roar. Back in the ops tent, Jacob sipped his lukewarm coffee, eyes glued to the blue icon of Hawk breaking away from Mace Airfield, arrowing straight toward the hot zone. It was only then that someone leaned close and murmured, almost nervously, Sir, you said any jet? Jacobs barely glanced over. Yeah, why? You just deployed an A-10. He froze, blinked once, twice. Then his face paled. God help her. But Riley didn't need help. She needed targets. The valley opened beneath her, a jagged scar in the earth. Smoke plumes coiled into the sky. Tracer fire arced upward like angry fireflies. A small knot of American soldiers clung to life behind a rock outcrop, red enemy indicators swarming from every direction. Echo 3, this is Hawk, she said, voice steady over the comms. I have visual on friendlies, and you have got company. Static crackled before a breathless voice replied, Copy, Hawk. We're getting chewed up here. You alone? Riley leveled her wings. You'll be fine. Her thumb flicked the armament master switch. The HUD came alive, target diamonds painting the battlefield. She nosed the Warthog down. The A-10 screamed toward the earth like a predator diving for the kill. Its GAU-8 Avenger cannon spun up with a metallic whine, and then it spoke, chattering thunder, a sound that was less mechanical and more primal, echoing off canyon walls. 30-millimeter rounds tore through enemy ranks with ruthless precision. Trucks erupted into fireballs. Fighters dove for cover. Trees shattered under the impact. Dust filled the valley as disbelief rippled through the enemy line. Riley didn't climb. She swooped. Target one down, she reported, already banking hard for another run. In the command tent, silence fell. All eyes fixed on the overhead drone feed as the A-10 carved across the valley, smoke trailing in her wake like the tail of a vengeful comet. Jacobs leaned closer, hands gripping the table's edge. He'd seen A-10s before, but never like this. Never flown like a hawk in a canyon full of prey. Down below, one of the pinned soldiers, 22-year-old Private Carson, peeked from behind the rocks. His jaw dropped. "That's a hog," he whispered. Staff Sergeant Villa, his squad leader, nodded, stunned. "That ain't just a hog, that's hawk." They watched in awe as Riley skimmed barely 30 feet above the ground, performing maneuvers that should have been impossible for a machine so bulky. She rolled over the ridge and let the Avenger rip again. Enemy fighters scattered like ants. Smoke thickened, black and oily. "Taking fire from the west ridge," the ground unit called. "Copy," Riley replied. "Mark your position." "Orange smoke now." An instant later, an orange cloud bloomed against the rocks. Riley's eyes locked on to movement. Enemy silhouettes darting between boulders, RPGs in hand. She lined up. Gun spun. Fired. The ridge erupted. One RPG gunner was thrown backward like a rag doll. The rest vanished in dust and rock. "Threat suppressed," she said calmly. In the tent, Jacobs whispered to no one in particular. "She's controlling the whole damn battlefield." Riley glanced at her fuel. Not great. Full throttle runs at low altitude had drained the tank fast. But leaving wasn't an option. Not yet. She caught sight of movement, a technical truck creeping toward the friendlies from behind. A Toyota with a mounted heavy gun, perfect for cutting down survivors. Riley rolled the Warthog nearly sideways, banked hard, and dove. This time she got close enough to see the driver's eyes before she fired. The truck vanished in a bloom of flame. "Threat neutralized," she radioed. "Hawk, you just saved our asses," the ground team answered, raw relief in their voice. "Just another Tuesday," she said, though sweat trickled down her temple. Finally, a pair of F-15s streaked overhead. "Control, this is Talon Flight. We're on station." "Hawk to Talon," Riley said. "Welcome to the party. Scene's clear, still hot. Maintain altitude. I'm Winchester and low on fuel." "Copy that," Talon replied. "We'll babysit. You've done the heavy lifting." Riley turned for base, giving the battlefield one last glance. Below, the soldiers were waving rifles, jumping, cheering. Her battered Warthog passed overhead like a metal guardian angel trailing smoke and fire. 20 minutes later, she touched down. The A-10 bore scars, scorched paint, shrapnel-pitted flaps, soot-streaked nose, but it stood proud. Ugly, perfect. Riley climbed down, nodded to her crew chief, and walked toward the ops tent without a word. People stepped aside as she passed. Inside, the room fell silent. Colonel Jacobs stood stiff, arms folded. Riley stopped in front of him. He studied her for a long moment before speaking. "You were the first on scene, alone." She gave a half smile. "That's usually how it works." He exhaled slowly. "I said any jet. I didn't expect you." Riley met his eyes without flinching. "Then you shouldn't have said any jet." Outside, her Warthog still smoked on the tarmac, the Avenger cannon faintly glowing from the wrath it had delivered. Echo 3 was gone. Every last one of them. Colonel Jacobs lifted his head as the pilot approached, boots crunching against the dirt until she stopped 3 feet in front of him. "We lost 0, he said quietly. "Not a single casualty, not even a scratch." Captain Riley Hawk Jameson gave a short nod. "Kong, they did their part, I did mine." Jacob studied her face. There was no pride there, no gloating, just a steady, professional calm. A faint layer of grime streaked her cheeks and jaw, the kind that clung to anyone who had flown close air support missions for too long. "You understand?" His voice was low. "I was expecting raptors, maybe eagles." Her eyes met his. "Sir, raptors don't loiter. F-15s don't turn inside a canyon, and they sure don't carry 1,100 rounds of God's judgment." Jacobs exhaled through his nose. She was right, of course. He had known it even before she touched down. "Go debrief," he said finally. "And hell of a job." She gave a single nod, turned on her heel, and left. 2 hours later, a Chinook rumbled into a secure forward operating base on the edge of the valley. The soldiers of Echo 3 staggered out, faces smeared with grime, eyes wide. heart still pounding from the kind of mission that should have ended in a massacre. Private Carson, just 22, stepped off the ramp and immediately tilted his head skyward. The sun was melting into the horizon, the orange bleeding into a deep, bruised purple. Obito, she really flew that thing alone, he asked, half in awe. Staff Sergeant Villa, his squad leader, clapped him on the shoulder. Not just flew it, kid. She owned it. You ever hear an A-10 cannon up close before? Carson shook his head. Feels like the earth tearing in half, Villa said, grinning now. And she made it sing like a damn orchestra. Back at base, Riley sat in the debriefing room, still wearing her flight suit, the scent of jet fuel and scorched metal clinging to her. Screens flickered with drone footage and helmet cam recordings of her gun runs. Major Rhodes, the debrief officer, leaned back in his chair as the number scrolled across his tablet. 27 confirmed kills, 3 vehicle strikes, 0 friendly fire. You took out that anti-air battery in one pass. I missed the first burst, Riley said flatly. Rhodes blinked. That was your miss? I was off by a meter, corrected on the second burst. Silence hung for a moment before Rhodes shook his head slowly. You're ridiculous. The corner of Riley's mouth twitched into the faintest smile. You should see me on a bad day. Elsewhere on base, Colonel Jacobs watched the mission video alone. He paused the footage at the frame where Riley's Warthog skimmed treetops, diving on an RPG team like a predator from the sky. He rewound, watched again. Every maneuver had purpose. Every burst of fire had weight. Nothing wasted. On his desk sat the old mission doctrine binder. High-altitude superiority, stealth fighters, rapid strike tactics. He closed it slowly, almost with reverence for something that no longer applied. Then he reached for his radio. Tell Air Ops to keep the A-10s fueled and ready. We're going to need more of that kind of flying. A pause crackled over the line. Yes, even if they're slow, we're not fighting for speed. We're fighting for persistence. Night settled over the airfield. Riley stood outside her hangar, watching the first stars pierce the fading contrails. All around, other jets gleamed under floodlights, scrubbed clean and polished. Her Warthog still wore its combat grime like a badge of honor. She preferred it that way. A maintenance tech approached with a rag and a clipboard. You want us to scrub her down? She shook her head. Leave it. Let her breathe. The tech hesitated, then smiled. She deserves it. He walked off, leaving her alone with the beast. Across the base, someone set up a speaker near the barracks and replayed the helmet cam footage. Her A-10 screaming overhead, cannon roaring. Soldiers gathered around with beers in hand, watching the replay on a loop. Right there, one shouted as a truck erupted in fire. You see that pass? I felt the rounds before I even heard them. They cheered like fans at a championship game. But deep down, every man and woman there knew they weren't just watching a display of tactics or technology. They were watching survival. They were watching salvation. Hours later, Riley sat on her bunk, peeling off her flight suit. From her locker, she pulled a folded slip of paper, 4 words in black ink, left by some quiet hand on her crew. We owe you everything. She stared at it for a long time before tucking it between the pages of her flight log and clicking off the light. The next morning, a new assignment hit Colonel Jacobs' desk. Another unit surrounded, new terrain, unfamiliar threats. He rubbed his eyes, sipped his black coffee, and didn't hesitate. Send Hawk. His aide blinked. Sir, you heard me. If she's got gas, send her. On the flight line, Riley was already in motion. She had studied the satellite imagery, memorized the ridge lines, traced escape paths, and drilled the timing intervals into her head. This wasn't luck. This was work, grind, obsession. As the crew loaded ordnance beneath her wings, one mechanic glanced up. Captain, don't you ever get scared flying that low? Riley tightened her gloves. The day I stop being scared is the day I get sloppy. Helmet on, visor down, cockpit sealed. Engines roared to life. Another takeoff, another battlefield. Another storm she would carry with her. Across the theater, the lesson was spreading fast. Don't underestimate the old bird. Don't question the quiet pilot. And never, ever say any jet will do again. Because sometimes the only jet that matters is the one nobody else believes in. flown by the pilot who believes in nothing but getting the job done. The next mission arrived with no fanfare. Early morning haze clung to the runway when Riley opened her locker and found a sealed envelope marked eyes only. Inside, a satellite photo, 3 radio transcripts, and a grainy infrared shot of insurgents planting man pads along a ridge overlooking a supply route. If left unchecked, 2 convoys would be gone by nightfall. Margin for error, minutes. Riley didn't flinch. She suited up in silence, sidearm checked, mission notes memorized, half a bottle of lukewarm electrolyte mix swallowed, then headed for her Warthog. The aircraft waited like a scarred warhound, still pockmarked from the last mission. Each dent was a story it refused to stop telling. Her crew chief fell in step beside her. "You know there's a rumor going to Rishtad," he said, wiping grease from his hands. "Oh yeah? They're saying command's thinking about naming a new tactical doctrine after you." Riley didn't break stride. "They don't need a name. They need pilots who commit." "Still," he said, "it's not every day a Warthog makes the colonel question half the Air Wing's doctrine." Riley paused at the ladder, glancing up at her battered aircraft. "Doctrine doesn't mean a damn thing if it can't bring boots home." She climbed up into the cockpit. Riley slid into the cockpit and began powering up the systems. The HUD blinked to life, glowing a sharp green in the dim light. Target coordinates were locked. Weapon systems armed. The A-10, her steel Predator, came alive far above the target zone. Thin clouds drifted over the valley, their shapes shifting as the wind teased them apart. She caught a rising thermal and rode it up to 10,000 feet before cutting the engines, letting the jet glide in eerie silence toward the ridge. Risky, yes, but Riley Jameson, callsign Hawk, knew the sound of her twin engines would carry for miles, announcing her presence long before she ever fired a shot. Silence was a weapon of its own. Silence made people nervous. Silence made them make mistakes. At 7,000 feet, her thermal scope flickered with movement. Heat signatures. Several figures sprinting toward a vehicle, a launcher hoisted on one of their shoulders. Perfect. Her thumb hovered over the trigger. She inched the throttle forward, keeping her speed low enough to stay ghost-like above the treetops. "Steady," she murmured to herself. "One more second." She squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 cannon didn't just fire, it roared. The brutal staccato shredded the calm night, rattling birds from the trees and echoing off the mountains. The launcher and half the rocky ridge erupted in a burst of fire and pulverized stone. 2 enemy silhouettes broke from cover, sprinting down slope. Riley banked hard, her A-10 circling tight, hunting them like a hawk with blood on its talons. On the ground, chaos bloomed. Radios sputtered with panicked chatter, enemy fighters shouting about ghost fire from the sky. Those who survived ran for the caves that pocked the hillside, convinced the dark stone would protect them. Riley tracked the fleeing heat signatures until they vanished into the black crevices. "Caves," she muttered under her breath. "Smart, but not smart enough." She armed a pair of thermobaric bunker busters and adjusted the aim 6 degrees off-center, careful to collapse the cave entrance without risking civilian harm. 2 quick releases. The bombs hit with a deep, gut-punching thud that seemed to make the mountain itself groan. Dust and rock belched from the hillside. Riley circled once, patient, watching through thermal. Nothing moved. Satisfied, she banked toward home. At Forward Operating Base Ashburn, Colonel Jacobs was already watching the live feed in the war room, flanked by 2 NATO observers. One of them leaned forward, squinting at the screen. "Who's flying that sortie?" he asked. He asked. Jacobs didn't answer right away. He just pointed at the image of the collapsing cave. "That system's been running arms into 3 provinces for years," he said evenly. "We've never touched it. Satellites couldn't even find the entrances." "So how'd she find it?" the second observer pressed. Jacobs allowed himself a rare, almost imperceptible smile. "She heard it." 20 minutes into the flight home, a new alert pinged across Riley's secondary display. Not her mission sector, 10 clicks northeast. A distress beacon, unknown air contact, friendly recon patrol in danger. UAV activity is suspected. She checked her fuel gauge. Enough for a detour and one hard engagement. She keyed her mic. "Control, Hawk. Diverting to investigate." The reply crackled through the static. "Acknowledged, Hawk. Friendly patrol has lost visual. They're hiding in a dry gulch. Enemy drone likely overhead. Show me the terrain. Her HUD flickered, displaying a topographic overlay. A shallow V-shaped depression. Loose boulders all around. A perfect kill box. She dropped her altitude as she approached. Then her threat warning blared. Missile lock. Too late, she hissed. Flares spat from her A-10 as she yanked the throttle and dove into a narrow canyon, her wingtips clearing the rock by barely 10 feet. A branch scraped against the fuselage as she screamed through the pass. Another lock tone wailed. Second missile incoming. She rolled hard left, dumped more flares. The missile streaked past, missing her tail by a whisper. Close one, she muttered, teeth clenched. My turn. She climbed just enough to glimpse the gulch below, then rolled inverted and dove upside down through the gap. Target acquired, a fighter bracing a shoulder-fired launcher. She squeezed off a short burst. 5 rounds, no more. The launcher disintegrated. The fighter disappeared in a spray of debris. No more threats on scope. Then a shaky voice broke through on the emergency frequency. Whoever that was, thank you, Hawk. Next time, she replied dryly, don't hide near cliffs. Noted, came the breathless response. You really saved our asses again. Just covering the grid, she said, and turned for home. This time the call came before she even touched down. Colonel Jacobs requests you in the war room. Priority debrief. Riley smirked behind her visor. Of course he does. Inside the war room, Jacobs waited alone. He didn't waste time. You saved 2 missions in 4 hours, he said, voice even but charged. You found caves no one's mapped. You dodged 2 shoulder-fired missiles and neutralized a recon drone, solo. Lucky day, she said, her tone flat but with the edge of a grin. You scare me, Jameson. She paused. Good, Jacobs chuckled. You know what scares me more? What? That we only have one of you. The next morning, the forward operating base felt strangely still. No alarms, no emergency pings, no frantic orders barked over radios. Just silence, heavy and waiting. Riley sat at the edge of the flight line, sipping bitter black coffee from a dented metal mug. Her flight suit was unzipped at the collar, sweat darkening the t-shirt beneath. Fine desert dust clung to every surface, including her. She didn't mind. She liked the quiet. She listened to it because, out here, it never lasted long. Behind her, 2 young pilots whispered near a hangar. I think she dreams in infrared, one said. You don't fly like that, the other murmured, without losing something. She didn't correct them. They were wrong. She hadn't lost anything. She gave pieces of herself away every time she dove into danger alone, when others waited for the all clear. She didn't ask questions. She answered them, with steel, fire, and thunder. Inside the war room, Jacobs studied fresh satellite images with a face carved from stone. Insurgents were already shifting to a new sector, Delta II, smuggling weapons through ancient caravan routes hidden among the cliffs. Worse terrain this time, deep ravines, tunnels under crumbling rock. No clean landing zones for infantry. No drone coverage. Clouds and mountains swallowed the satellite's eyes. They needed air support, not just any pilot. Jacobs reached for the secure line. Send in Hawk. Riley's A-10 was already being refueled by the time she crossed the tarmac, helmet tucked under her arm, boots grinding gravel. The mechanic stepped aside like she was walking into battle before the battle even began. The Warthog crouched on the tarmac like a scarred predator, its metal skin marred by old battles. Fresh belts of 30mm shells curled into its belly, thermobaric payloads and GPS-guided bombs secured under its wings. Riley Jameson, callsign Hawk, ran a hand along the fuselage as her crew chief approached, eyes sharp from too many long nights. Same load as Echo 3, he said, squinting at the tail. Fuel? She asked. 95%. He hesitated, voice lowering. Weather's thick over Delta II. No satellite coverage. Half your flight, you'll be blind. Riley glanced east. A dull haze was climbing the sky, swallowing the sun. Wouldn't be the first time. She climbed into the cockpit, strapped herself down, and began the familiar dance of switches and levers. The engines roared to life with a vibration that rattled her bones. The beast was awake again, hungry and eager. 10 minutes later, she punched through a ceiling of heavy gray clouds. Visibility collapsed to almost nothing. Her HUD flickered, fighting to stabilize against the jagged terrain below. She flew low, dangerously low, beneath the reach of radar-guided missiles, but high enough to dodge the violent microbursts that tore along the canyons. This was the razor's edge of flight, and Riley rode it without flinching. When the clouds parted for a heartbeat, she saw what Intel had missed: a trail of small pickups, barely visible under camo netting, snaking between the cliffs. She counted quickly. 6, no, 8 trucks, all armed, all spaced with precision. This wasn't random hiding. They were running drills, rehearsing escape routes, perfecting their timing. Training route, she muttered, flicking on the targeting system. No GPS lock. Manual only. Good. She liked manual. The Warthog dove, slicing through the air like a knife. Her first strike landed dead center. A technical truck exploded into a fireball, shrapnel spinning into the canyon wind. Chaos erupted below. Gunfire sparked from the rocks, and a single RPG streaked past her left wing, close enough to make her teeth clench. No time for fear. She banked wide, rolled hard, and came in for another pass. Her second bomb slammed into the canyon wall, collapsing rock onto the next truck. Stone and dust swallowed it whole. 2 down, 4 mobile, she reported, voice calm despite the storm in her ears. No one answered. She wasn't doing this for command. She was here to stop whatever these bastards were planning. Her third pass revealed something off. 2 enemy fighters knelt outside a low structure carved into the rock. They weren't running. They weren't afraid. They were, waiting. One dragged a massive tarp-covered object toward the shadow of a cave. Then she realized they wanted her to shoot. Her threat system blinked red. Lock-on detected. The signal came from inside the cliff. Her stomach dropped. Not a training route, a trap. Riley yanked the throttle, climbing hard, banking right. Too late. A missile screamed from the cave mouth, leaving a white tail in its wake. She rolled left, dumping flares, the Warthog howling as it clawed for the clouds. Come on! Come on! The missile caught her on the tail. Not a direct hit, but enough to make the birds shudder violently. Warning lights strobed across her panel. The left stabilizer was mauled, hydraulics sluggish. But the plane lived. Not dying today. Sheila hissed through her teeth. Back at the base, red lights flared in the command tent. Damage report from Hawk. Possible impact. Still airborne, someone shouted. Colonel Jacobs froze mid-step. She was still flying. Barely. His jaw tightened. That same look returned to his face. The one from Echo 3. A mixture of awe and disbelief. She's going back in, isn't she? No one answered. They didn't need to. Riley stabilized the crippled Warthog with delicate micro-adjustments. She knew what had to be done, but the launcher hidden in that cave couldn't be destroyed from the air without precision. She had one weapon left, a laser-guided bomb. Manual lock. No room for error. Slow and steady, she lined up the canyon. Panels flickered. The jet frame groaned. Her hands never shook. She released the bomb. It vanished into the dark mouth of the cliff. A second later, the mountain spat fire and rage. The launcher, and anyone near it, ceased to exist. The Warthog limped home, trailing smoke but victorious. On the tarmac, Colonel Jacobs waited, arms folded, the desert sun catching the steel in his eyes. Riley popped the canopy and climbed out stiff-legged. Steam hissed from the battered bird. Her left wing was shredded like paper. You okay? He asked. I will be, she said. That convoy was a decoy, he told her. They were testing how far we'd chase them. You broke the trap. Riley shrugged. Didn't like their hospitality. You were out of comms. We thought... He hesitated. We thought you might not come back. She met his gaze without blinking. That's your mistake. The medics swarmed her, running the standard post-flight checks, oxygen levels, reflexes, thermal imaging, reaction speed. They were looking for cracks, fear, trauma, hesitation. She knew they wouldn't find any. All she carried was fatigue and something heavier. Not weariness, pressure, like a bomb inside her chest, ready to split open. She'd learned to contain it. That night, she sat outside her bunk, cleaning her flight gloves with a toothbrush. Dust, soot, and blood came away in slow, careful strokes. The ritual calmed her. You didn't have to go back in. The voice belonged to Lieutenant Grayson, fresh from flight school, holding a tray of mess hall food. He shifted awkwardly in the dark. If I didn't, she said without looking up, someone else would have died. He hesitated. But with that kind of damage, I've flown worse. He swallowed, then asked softly, what does it feel like when you pull the trigger? Riley paused, looked at her gloves. Final, she said. It feels final. In the command tent, Colonel Jacobs studied a new intelligence report, his fingers drumming a nervous rhythm on the desk. A pattern was emerging: strategic feints, ambushes, deliberate disinformation. The enemy wasn't just attacking anymore. They were baiting. Sir, a voice called, command wants a full situational update in one. They're asking for pilot reports. Jacobs raised an eyebrow. They want her to brief? Yes, sir. Word from Joint Command. They've seen the drone footage. They said it was instructional. Jacobs gave a dry smirk. Yeah, instructional, all right. He scrawled one word across the margin of the report. Hawk. Riley stood before the briefing room the next morning, wearing her dress blues for the first time in months. They felt stiff, foreign. Her call sign was gone. No dirt, no gunpowder, just polished brass and cloth that had never tasted war. She hated the uniform, but she walked in anyway. The room was already full. Officers, analysts, and the quiet hum of expectation. And Hawk Jameson began to speak. Advisors filled the room, some gray-haired veterans, some barely past boyhood, the kind who still struggled to grow a full beard. She stood at the front, remote clipped to her belt, and began. Her voice was steady, flat, precise, stripped of anything but efficiency. This is your convoy decoy, she said as drone footage lit the screen behind her. The vehicles moved in perfect textbook spacing, a neat military picture. But her eyes had been trained to catch the small betrayals. Watch the acceleration, she continued. They're not pushing the lead truck. That's your first tell. A click of the remote. Next slide. A heat map bled across the screen, valleys and ridges glowing in ghostly shades. Low thermal signature inside the canyon, she said. That means active cooling systems, hidden launchers, cave-based. They're not mobile, they're not retreating, they're waiting. She paused, scanning the room. You'd call that a weakness, she said, her voice calm but sharp. I call it intent. Another click. This was my strike pattern. A diagram flared into view. Not optimal. Terrain denied me ideal lock angles. So I baited the second launcher, flew inside their range ring, forced them to show the system. A captain leaned forward, eyebrows drawn. You wanted to draw fire? I needed to find the cave. They weren't going to reveal it unless they believed I hadn't seen it. An older officer, skeptical, raised his brow. And what if they were right? She looked straight at him, her gaze unwavering. Then I'd be dead. Silence thickened the room, heavy and unblinking. From the back, Colonel Jacobs finally spoke. And she's not. After the briefing, and they swarmed her, officers with plans and ideas and careers to protect. One asked if she'd train new pilots in A-10 tactics. Another wanted her to sit on the air-to-ground doctrine advisory panel. Riley Jameson, callsign Hawk, just nodded politely. She had no plans to teach. She had only one plan: to fly. 2 days later, the storm came. Not clouds, not artillery, something far worse. A refugee convoy, 70 civilians, was ambushed near Grid Zulu 4, trapped between a crude minefield and a jagged, broken ridge. Mortars rained down from a hillside position they couldn't even see. No escort, no armor, no satellite coverage, and no time. The call came from top command: immediate extraction or air cover required. But there was no one else close enough, except her. Riley was already moving as she listened to the flight officer jogging beside her. They're pinned at the bend in the valley, he said, tablet clutched tight in one hand. We suspect mortar teams on the ridge, tripods, maybe drones, no hard air defenses, but no clear sight lines either. Riley finished for him, sliding her helmet over her head. Are they moving? He hesitated. No, front vehicle hit a mine, casualties unknown. They're boxed in. She glanced at her watch. What's the window? 14 minutes before they start getting overrun. Riley sealed her visor. Then I'm already late. She loaded only what she needed: cluster munitions, high-explosive rockets, a full spread of GAU-8 cannon rounds. Payload was irrelevant. Speed was everything. As the Warthog roared down the runway, base control came over the comm. Zulu 4 may have children. Confirmed. Family units. Watch fire radius. Copy, she said, voice firm. I'll be surgical. The valley was a nightmare. Steep hills, jagged ridges, scattered trees like shattered bones. Recon was nearly impossible. But Riley had learned long ago, difficult is not the same as impossible. She skimmed the ridges, engines screaming, scanning for the faintest glint of metal or smoke. Then, muzzle flashes. Barely visible behind a tattered camo net, a mortar tube kicked back. She yanked left, dropped a pair of cluster bombs into the thicket. Direct hit. Another flash, 4, maybe 5, on the opposite slope. She rolled her A-10 inverted, dove low, and opened the GAU-8. The sound was a growl of steel. The hillside erupted, trees splintered, dirt geysered, mortars fell silent. Below, the convoy lurched into motion. Relief was brief. The second explosion shook the valley. A buried IED under the fourth truck. Smoke churned skyward. Screams carried up to her cockpit. From above, Riley saw what the trapped civilians couldn't. 10 or more enemy fighters swarming from the rocks, moving like predators. She didn't wait for permission. She dove. The Warthog became a beast of fire and thunder, the cannon's roar echoing through the valley. 2 minutes later, the ambush was nothing but smoke and silence. She flew so low that soldiers swore they could see her eyes behind the canopy. 6 passes, every round spent. Only when the last civilian cleared the ridge did she climb and turn home. Colonel Jacobs met her on the runway, jaw tight, eyes heavy. I need you to know, he said quietly. If you hadn't launched when you did, she just nodded, too drained for ceremony. 70 people, he finished. Alive because you didn't wait for orders. Riley's eyes drifted to the Warthog, its paint blackened, gun barrel steaming, nose art chipped. Hawk's wrath. I don't wait, she said. I act. 2 days after the Zulu rescue, the hangar was silent but for the distant hum of fluorescent lights. Riley sat alone, long past sundown, staring at the scorched GAU-8 barrel. The old weapon groaned like a warhound that had run too long and hard. She knew the sound. Her own body made it now. Sleep rarely came. She didn't even want it. Every time she closed her eyes, the reel started. Convoys burning, fighters evaporating in smoke, children crying behind sandbags. She remembered every frame, and yet she suited up every time. Because if not her, who? In the mess hall, whispers crawled from table to table. Survival rates were no longer the story was her. How long can a pilot keep this tempo? Someone muttered over mashed potatoes. She's more machine than human, another said. Even Jacobs, listening from the corner, couldn't deny it. Riley was flying double the operational tempo of any other pilot. She volunteered for missions before they were announced. Half the time, she launched without backup. Trusted, but utterly alone. Then the alert came. A new message, encrypted, labeled Penumbra, eyes only. Jacobs opened the file and exhaled like he'd taken a hit to the gut. Inside was a name he hadn't heard in over a year. Argocell. They weren't insurgents. They were shadows, professionals, ex-military, ex-intelligence, mercenary ghosts hired for jobs that couldn't leave fingerprints. And now they were moving in Sector Bravo 9, within striking range of a humanitarian aid depot. Not just in country, hunting. Jacobs found Riley at the range, knocking over distant steel targets with her sidearm like she'd been born holding it. He didn't waste time. We've got a cell near Bravo 9, not locals, not amateurs. She holstered the pistol. How many? Unknown. Intel says Argocell, high probability. The name cut through her fatigue like a knife. Target? Aid convoy, doctors, civilians, soft profile, perfect for media impact. When? Jacobs handed her a tablet. They're moving tonight. Riley didn't ask for backup, didn't check the weather. Then I'll fly alone, she said. An hour later, she was in the cockpit watching the ground crew finish the final arming. This mission would be hers and hers alone. Colonel Jacobs watched the hangar from the shadows, his hands folded behind his back, saying nothing. Captain Riley Jameson, callsign Hawk, had chosen a loadout that left no room for doubt about her intentions. 2 Maverick missiles, flechette pods, aura-piercing rounds for the cannon, no distraction flares beyond the essentials, no soft options. She wasn't going up there to negotiate. She wasn't going to intimidate. She was going to stop them. Period. A young technician, barely out of flight school, approached with the final pre-flight checklist. He hesitated, eyes flicking between her war machine and her calm face. "You ever get scared, ma'am?" he asked, voice low, almost apologetic. Riley met his eyes and held them for a long beat. Then she nodded once. "Every time," she said simply, then climbed into the cockpit and pulled the canopy down. Moments later, she was airborne, disappearing into the bruised violet of dusk. The Bravo 9 sector was like nothing she'd flown over before. Dunes rolled into bone-dry riverbeds, forests of dead concrete structures stretched like the husks of abandoned cities, and a low chemical haze clung to the air, blurring even the thermal feed. Below, the aid convoy crept forward with headlights off, vehicles hugging one another in a tight, vulnerable line. They had no idea that predators were watching. Riley switched to thermal. There they were, on the ridge, 6 heat signatures, perfectly spaced, like beads on a wire, 2 of them brighter than the rest. "Argo," she muttered to herself. The insurgent cell had done its homework. They weren't firing yet. They were coordinating, setting up something deliberate. Riley dropped her altitude, using the dark to swallow her engine noise. Her first strike was meant to warn, not kill. A flechette burst that shredded an entire tree line without hitting a soul. Figures scattered in panic. Some bolted for cover. Others spun around and fired RPGs blindly into the night sky. She banked wide in a high G turn and came back for the real run. Her targeting computer locked onto 2 positions, 2 soft chimes. "Fox 2, she whispered. Twin Mavericks streaked toward the ridge. 2 precise detonations blossomed into fire and dirt, leaving nothing but smoking craters. And yet, no bodies. Riley frowned. Her gut tightened. Something was wrong. The lock-on alarm screamed in her headset half a second too late. Missile inbound. Her hands reacted before her brain caught up. Hard roll left, flares, stick yanked like she was trying to tear it free. The missile clipped her underside. A grazing hit, but enough to tear metal. Smoke poured from her starboard engine. She wasn't down, but she wasn't fast anymore. Gritting her teeth, she climbed, fighting the stick to see what she was up against. At 2,000 feet, the picture snapped into place. They weren't after the convoy. Not really. This was a trap. 6 new heat signatures flickered on her hoodie, camouflaged fighters with laser designators and shoulder-mounted missiles. "They want me," she realized aloud. "They want the Warthog." If they shot her down here, above the convoy, it would look like a friendly fire disaster. Argo would have propaganda for months. It wasn't just strategy, it was personal. Riley glanced at her payload. 1 Maverick left, no time for careful maneuvers. She banked high, disappearing into the moonless dark, then killed her engines. Gravity took hold. She dove almost silently, a ghost dive, the kind few pilots ever dared. Heartbeats, count them. Wait. One Argo shooter turned his head. Too late. Her GAU-8 cannon roared, a metallic thunder that rattled her bones. In under 2 seconds, 30 rounds vaporized him and his perch. She twisted left, dropped to treetop level, and locked her final Maverick onto a pulsing signal source, their command post. "Goodbye," she said, and fired. The ridge vanished in a bloom of fire. 5 targets gone. 1 remained. The last shooter launched his missile just as she cleared the hill. She didn't see it, didn't hear it. She felt it. The impact slammed her sideways. Her HUD flickered and died. The Warthog screamed through the sky, blind and wounded, alarms wailing in her ears. Still she flew on. Back at base, the comms room lit up. "Hawk has gone dark," a voice reported. Jacob stared at the screen, jaw tight. "She's alive," he said. "How can you know that?" "Because they haven't confirmed a kill," he murmured. 10 minutes passed, no signal. 20. Then at 22:17, a single broken transmission crackled across the long-range band. "This is Hawk. Bird wounded, mission complete, en route." Jacobs exhaled and whispered, "Damn right you are." When Riley landed, the base fell silent, not from fear, from reverence. The A-10 looked like it had crawled through hell. One wing charred black, fuselage punctured by shrapnel, smoke still curling from the engine bay. She stepped down under her own power. Someone started to clap. "Get her rearmed," she said flatly. "We're not done." They grounded her the next morning, not because they doubted her, but because the Warthog couldn't fly. Both engine manifolds were punctured, internal power routing fried. Diagnostics said it was a miracle she'd made it back at all. One more pass and she'd have been a smear of ash in a burning field. Riley didn't care. Grounding her meant someone else would fly the next sortie. Someone slower, someone not her. Jacobs found her in the maintenance bay at 0400, a wrench in one hand, streaks of hydraulic oil across her fatigues, face hard with focus. "They're ordering in a replacement airframe," he told her. 72 hours. "I'm not waiting 72 hours, she said, tearing open a scorched panel. "You realize you're putting this thing back together with elbow grease and rage, right?" "More than most pilots start with," she said, not looking up. "Riley, you're exhausted. 2 months of non-stop red-line missions. I need you sharp, not stubborn." She paused only for a second. "This isn't about being stubborn." "Then what is it about?" She finally looked at him. "Finishing this." Intel confirmed her instincts. Argo's cell was predicting a final strike. Their escape route was secure. Private aircraft waiting on a dirt strip near Sector Whiskey 2 in less than 48 hours. Their goal? Wipe out the last rural broadcast station still running. That station wasn't just a transmitter. It was hope. It showed convoy rescues, humanitarian drops, and sometimes footage of Riley carving up mortar teams. Locals had given her a name, Shaheen, the Hawk. If Argo destroyed that signal, they wouldn't just kill communications. They'd kill a symbol. By noon, base engineers declared her Warthog unsafe for combat. She ignored them. She rerouted electrical flow manually, rebuilt a wing actuator with parts stripped from a retired airframe, and burned her hands pulling a warp panel from the cooling system. By sunset, the bird passed a startup test. By midnight, the cannon's dry fire shook the hangar like a personal war drum. She called Jacobs. "It's flying," she said. He didn't argue, just one question. "When?" "Now." Sector Whiskey 2 was 200 kilometers of nothing, ridges, dry craters, dead land, no infrastructure, no support. Riley flew alone. Her Warthog was a patchwork of survival and stubborn will. Twin Mavericks loaded, a single JDAM waiting like a secret ace, one custom heat seeker, and every last cannon shell the crew could scrounge. The cockpit was a mess of stripped wires and duct tape, the HUD flickering in and out like a faulty heartbeat. But the bird could still fly. And for Riley Jameson, call sign Hawk, that was all that mattered. Beneath her, the world slid by like an old, sun-faded photograph. Brown hills curled into gullies that looked like veins on a corpse. Once, a city had thrived here. Now, only its ghost remained, crumbled buildings and empty streets baking under a merciless sun. On the horizon, the broadcast tower stabbed at the sky, a lonely steel spire ringed with sandbags. A skeleton crew manned it. Volunteers, lightly armed, no armor, just hope in a few rifles. Riley switched comms. "Whiskey 2, this is Hawk inbound. Any movement?" For a moment, only static. Then a ragged voice answered. "We spotted 3 armored pickups about 2 hours ago. South Ridge, haven't engaged." "Copy, maintain cover. I'll sweep first." She banked right, wings dipping low, sun glinting off battered metal. South Ridge stretched below her, silent, too silent. Her thermal scan showed nothing. No warm engines, no infrared pings. Her gut twisted. Something's wrong. Riley dropped altitude, slowing, keeping the sun at her back to hide her approach. She scanned for anything, a flicker, a shadow, until it caught her eye. A metallic glint. One truck half buried under a net dusted with desert sand. Then another. Vehicles scattered in a crescent, all pointing away from the tower. They're not going for the station, she muttered. They're waiting for evac. Her eyes raked the horizon. 6 kilometers east, the desert stretched into a long, straight scar of gravel, a forgotten landing strip, fresh tire tracks, fuel drums, a temporary beacon flickering faintly. A plane was coming. They were waiting for it. Riley dove lower, and the world exploded. 2 heat-seeking missiles screamed toward her in perfect unison, one from the ridge, the other from behind the station. Instinct took over. She rolled hard, flares dropping like sparks from a dragon, and slammed her stick left. One missile spiraled harmlessly into the sky. The other clipped her wing, tearing metal, sending a shudder through her bones. You missed, she growled. Her cannon roared, fire tearing the shooter's position apart in a cloud of dust and smoke. Then her focus shifted. The landing strip, their escape route. She locked her JDAM. A green light flickered on her display. Goodbye. The bomb fell like a verdict from the heavens. Impact. A column of fire swallowed the old airfield, black smoke curling into the sun. Their exit was gone, and as she expected, they came for her. 6 hostiles burst from the sand, shoulder launchers and heavy rifles glinting. Riley didn't hesitate. She dropped low, swept them with her cannon. 5 fell instantly. The 6th fired, the round cracking her canopy but missing flesh. She rolled right, looped, and finished it. Silence. The station crew crawled from their sandbag cover, staring up at her like they'd just seen a god descend in iron and fire. One raised a hand-cranked camera. Riley didn't pose. She hovered for a heartbeat, then peeled westward. Her fuel alarm was already blinking red. Back at base, she landed on fumes. Colonel Jacobs was waiting, but he didn't say a word, just offered his hand. Riley didn't take it. She stood on her own, and for the first time in weeks, maybe months, she smiled. A real smile. That night, the footage spread across the region. Burning runway, swooping Warthog. Locals huddled in tents, shelters, rooftops, and underground stations, watching. Children mimicked the roar of her engines with their mouths. In a refugee camp, someone painted a mural, her A-10 arcing over a blood-red sun. Beneath it, the words, "She flies for us." They tried to give her a medal. She refused. "I don't fly for ribbons," she said. "I fly to end things." But the next morning, she did something no one expected. Riley walked into the training tent. 20 young pilots stared back, most barely out of their first briefings. She scanned their faces, saw the fear, the hesitation, and spoke. "You want to survive out there?" Her voice cut through the cold air. "Stop flying like this is a video game. Stop waiting for orders while people date. Stop thinking jets win wars." She stepped closer. "People do. You do when you stop flying scared." She turned to leave, then glanced back. "And if you ever need backup," she said, pausing at the flap of the tent, "you know where to find me." The morning of the final mission came gray and bone-deep cold, the kind of chill that sank into memory as much as skin. By first light, Riley was already suited up, silent on the tarmac. The hangar was empty except for her Warthog, scarred, battle-worn, but ready. This mission was different. No rescues, no sweeps. This was an ending. Intel had pinpointed the Argo cell's last stronghold, a mountain compound, a fortress buried in jagged shadows where drones couldn't reach and satellites couldn't see. Jacobs met her at the edge of the flight line. "Today we finish this," he said. Riley nodded. "Or we don't come back." The flight north was tense and silent. Radio chatter reduced to surgical updates. When she reached the mountains, her HUD flickered and died, signals swallowed by the canyons. The air grew thick with inevitability. The Argo cell knew she was coming. Heat signatures bloomed. Fighters, shoulder launchers, tripwires, and anti-aircraft guns. A death trap. But the Warthog didn't flinch. And neither did she. Her fingers danced over the controls, countermeasures flaring, cannon roaring. She wove between jagged rocks like a phantom. The first enemy cluster erupted under her brrr of fire. Rockets followed, carving fiery scars across the compound. Missile warning screamed. She dove. Flares, spin. The jet rattled, systems blinking in protest. Then the second missile. Closer. She banked hard, clearing a rock face by meters. From the canyon floor, a new predator rose. A stealth drone, silent, its laser designator painting her death. Riley caught it on a HUD at the last heartbeat. Maverick missile locked. Fox 2. The drone became a burst of sparks and smoke. The fight blurred into precision and instinct. Minutes felt like hours. Her mind honed into a single edge. She wasn't flying the Warthog anymore. She was the Warthog. And then, at last, the Argo lines broke. Fire consumed the compound. Target destroyed, she radioed. Returning to base. Hawk, copy, Jacobs answered. We're waiting. She landed to a quiet, heavy air. Her flight suit streaked with soot and sweat. A small crowd, pilots, medics, watched her walk in, carrying the silence of victory and the weight of its cost. The engineers stood in a line, their faces streaked with exhaustion and pride, while Colonel Jacobs led the way to the front. His boots echoed against the hangar floor as he stopped just a step away from Captain Riley Jameson. Call sign Hawk. He looked at her with an expression that was somewhere between disbelief and awe. Jameson, he said slowly, you've done what no one thought was possible. Riley shook her head, her voice quiet but steady. It wasn't just me, sir. It was every pilot who refused to quit when it mattered. For a moment, the colonel said nothing, and then a small, knowing smile broke across his weathered face. We owe you more than medals. Weeks later, Riley found herself standing on a stage inside the Pentagon, the weight of the Distinguished Flying Cross resting in her hands. Bright lights glared down, but she spoke softly, firmly, as if she were speaking only to the people who had been there with her. I fly because people need me to fly, she said, each word measured and true. I fight because people need me to fight. And I come home because I want to make sure someone else gets that same chance. The room went still. Not a cough, not a shuffle. Just silence, heavy and reverent. Riley's gaze drifted over the audience as she gave her last words. War isn't about jets. It isn't about weapons. It's about people. When she returned home, she went back to the old neighborhood where she had once dreamed of flight. A local school had invited her to speak, and the children crowded around her, their eyes huge as they stared at the scuffed flight jacket and the helmet she carried under one arm. One small voice piped up, trembling with curiosity. Are you a superhero? Riley's smile was warm, a little tired, but genuine. No, she said. I'm just someone who refused to stop. And somewhere far away, the colonel who had once shrugged and said, any jet will do, remembered the day an A-10 appeared first on the horizon, low and slow, roaring into a sky where no one else dared to fly. He had gone pale that day, realizing a simple, humbling truth. Sometimes legends are built not just from iron, but from courage, and from a single pilot willing to take the sky when everyone else hesitates. Riley's story wasn't about an A-10, not really. It was about willpower, determination, hope, and the undeniable truth that no machine, no matter how advanced, could ever replace the heart of a pilot who simply refuses to give up.